The Galactic Hegemony had ruled the known universe for 12,000 years. Their power was absolute. Their technology was beyond anything other species could imagine. And their sensor networks covered every corner of space. Nothing moved without their knowledge. No ship could fly. No message could be sent. No secret could be kept without the hegemony seeing. This was the foundation of their power. Knowledge. Total. Knowledge of everything that happened in the galaxy, senior sensor analyst. Telvox sat at his station on Imperial Watch Station. Nexus 7. He had worked this job for 30 years. Every day was the same. Ships moved across his screens. Signals flowed through his equipment. Everything was cataloged, recorded, and filed. The galaxy was quiet and controlled. Then he saw something strange. At first, Telvox thought his equipment was broken. His sensors showed a gravitational disturbance in the outer rim of the galaxy. Something massive was moving through space. Something big enough to bend light itself. But when he looked for the usual signals, he found nothing. No energy readings. No radio waves. No heat signature. No transponder code. The object was invisible to everything except gravity itself. Telvox ran his diagnostics 3 times. His equipment was working perfectly. He contacted 2 other watch stations. They reported the same thing. A massive object was approaching the Imperial capital world, and nobody could identify it. High Commander Vitherus dismissed the reports at first. He was a proud officer who had served the hegemony for 2 centuries. He had seen many strange things in space, and most of them turned out to be sensor errors or natural phenomena. But when 7 more stations reported the same anomaly, Vitherus felt the first cold touch of fear. He summoned Admiral Korath, commander of the 3rd Fleet. Korath was the finest military mind in the hegemony. He had crushed rebellions on 100 worlds. He had never lost a battle. Korath studied the data with growing concern. The object was moving at incredible speed. Its trajectory was clear. It was heading directly toward the Imperial capital world, the heart of the hegemony's power. At its current speed, it would arrive in 6 standard rotations. 6 days until something unknown reached the most important planet in the galaxy. Korath assembled the greatest scientists in the Empire. They studied the data for hours. They ran simulations. They checked every database. None of them could explain what they were seeing. Every known species in the galaxy produced detectable signals. Every ship, every probe, every piece of technology generated energy signatures that the hegemony's sensors could see. This was basic physics. This was fundamental science. This object broke all the rules. Supreme Chancellor Morthix demanded answers. He was the most powerful being in the galaxy, and he did not like mysteries. Mysteries meant someone was hiding something, and nobody hid anything from the hegemony. Nobody except, apparently. Whoever built this approaching vessel, the intelligence division began searching their records. They looked for any species that had ever tried to develop stealth technology. The list was short. Most species that attempted to hide from the hegemony were discovered and punished. Their research was destroyed. Their scientists were executed, but one name kept appearing in the old files. Humans. 40 years ago. The hegemony had discovered a small blue planet called Earth. The humans living there were primitive by galactic standards. They had barely reached their own moon. They posed no threat to anyone. The hegemony decided to integrate them. Integration was a polite word for conquest. Human governments were forced to surrender. Human technology was restricted. Human populations were monitored and controlled. The integration had not been gentle. Millions died in the first years. Cities were destroyed. Families were torn apart. The humans learned to bow their heads and obey, or so the hegemony believed. The intelligence files showed that humans had once tried to develop silent technology. Ships that could move without detection. Communication systems that could not be traced. The project was discovered in its early stages and destroyed at least. The hegemony thought it was destroyed, far across the galaxy. Aboard a ship that existed in the space between detection, Captain Park Doyen reviewed his mission briefing for the 100th time. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had not slept well in 18 months. 18 months. That was how long the UN silence had been traveling. 18 months of complete electromagnetic silence. No radio, no active sensors, no communication with Earth. The ship moved through space like a ghost, visible only to gravity itself. The silence was humanity's greatest achievement. Built in secret over 30 years, powered by gravity wave technology that the hegemony did not know existed, crewed by 847 volunteers, who knew they would probably never see home again. Doyen walked through the corridors of his ship. He passed crew members working silently at their stations. They did not speak unless necessary. Even inside the ship, they maintained discipline. They had trained for years for this mission. He reached the observation deck and looked out at the stars. Somewhere ahead, invisible to his eyes but clear on his navigation charts, was the Imperial Capital World, the seat of power for the beings who had conquered his planet, who had killed his wife. Commander Yoon Hyung joined him at the window. She was his first officer, a brilliant tactician who had lost her entire family during the integration. Her face was calm, but Doyen knew the fire that burned inside her. "We passed the outer detection grid 3 hours ago," she said. "No response from the hegemony fleet. They still cannot see us." Doyen nodded slowly. "They are starting to panic. I can feel it," Hyung said. "Let them feel what we felt. Let them know what it is like to face something they do not understand." Doyen thought about his daughter Ji-woo, still on Earth. She was 23 years old now. He had not seen her in 5 years. He wondered if he would ever see her again. "We are not here for revenge," he said quietly. "We are here for truth." Hyung looked at him. Her eyes were hard. Sometimes truth is the best revenge. The silence continued its journey through the darkness. Behind it, an empire began to tremble. Ahead, destiny waited, and the galaxy held its breath. The Imperial Council met in emergency session for the first time in 300 years. 12 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy gathered around a great circular table. Their holographic forms flickered with barely hidden fear. Supreme Chancellor Morthix sat at the head of the table. He had ruled the hegemony for 5 centuries. He had crushed rebellions, destroyed civilizations, and bent the galaxy to his will. Nothing had ever frightened him until now. Admiral Korath delivered his report. The Third Fleet had been mobilized. 4,000 warships now formed a defensive ring around the capital world. It was the largest military gathering in hegemony history, but Korath admitted a terrible truth. His weapons were useless. Every targeting system in the fleet relied on sensor locks. Without a signal to track, his ships could not aim. They would be firing blind at empty space. Intelligence Director Silix presented her findings. Her agents had dug through 40 years of records. The evidence pointed to one species: humans. The Council remembered humans. Small creatures from a small planet, weak, primitive, easily conquered. They had been integrated 4 decades ago and had caused no problems since then, or so everyone thought. Silix explained that humans had secretly continued their research to silent technology. They had hidden their work so well that the hegemony never suspected. For 30 years they had built something in the shadows. And now that something was approaching, the heart of the empire, Chancellor Morthix ordered the human ambassador brought before the council immediately. Bei Sunwoo was an elderly man with white hair and a gentle face. He had served as Earth's ambassador for 15 years. He was known for his calm manner and careful words. Guards dragged him from his quarters and threw him before the council like a criminal. Morthix leaned forward on his throne. His eyes burned with cold fury. "What is approaching our capital?" he demanded. Sunwoo straightened his clothes and looked up at the Chancellor without fear. "I am afraid I do not know what you mean. Do not play games with me, human. Your species has sent something toward our world. A ship that our sensors cannot detect? What is it?" Sunwoo smiled softly. It was the smile of a man who had already accepted his death. "If your sensors cannot detect it, then how do you know it exists?" The council erupted in anger. Voices shouted accusations. Threats filled the air. Sunwoo stood calmly in the middle of the storm, unmoved. Morthix raised his hand and the room fell silent. "You will tell us what we want to know," he said. "We have ways of making even humans talk." Sunwoo met his gaze steadily. "You may torture me if you wish. You may kill me. But I cannot tell you what I do not know. The mission you speak of was kept secret even from me. I know nothing of its purpose or its crew." He was telling the truth. The mission had been compartmentalized from the beginning. Only those aboard the Silence knew its true purpose. This was done deliberately, so that no amount of torture could reveal the plan. Sunwoo was taken to a detention cell. Interrogators worked on him for hours. He told them nothing, because he had nothing to tell. Aboard the Silence, life continued with quiet purpose. Chief Engineer Kim Taiwan ran diagnostics on the ship's most important cargo. It was not a weapon. It was not a bomb. It was something far more dangerous. They called it the Whisper. The Whisper was a quantum-angled broadcasting system. It used technology that the hegemony had never imagined. When activated, it would send a message to every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously. The message could not be blocked. It could not be jammed. It could not be stopped. And that message would contain the truth. For 40 years, humans had gathered evidence. They had documented every crime the hegemony had committed, every genocide, every forced sterilization program, every species that had been quietly erased from existence, every lie that held the empire together. The hegemony ruled through fear and ignorance. They controlled information as carefully as they controlled weapons. The trillions of beings across the galaxy did not know what their rulers had done. They believed the hegemony was benevolent. They believed integration was a gift. Humanity intended to show them the truth. Navigation. Officer Choi Yun-ji announced that they had passed the outer defense perimeter. The hegemony fleet had not detected them. They were now inside enemy territory. There was no celebration. The crew knew the odds. They knew they would probably die. But they also knew that their deaths would mean something. Captain Doyon visited the ship's memorial room. It was a small chamber filled with holographic images. Faces scrolled past. Names, dates. These were the victims of Earth's integration. Millions of faces. Millions of stories cut short. He found his wife among them. Park Murray. She had been a teacher. She had believed in the goodness of all beings, even the hegemony. She had tried to peacefully protest the integration. They killed her for it. Doyon stood before her image for a long time. Her smile was frozen in light, unchanged by the years. She looked just as she had on the day they met. "Almost there," he whispered. "We are almost there, my love. Soon the galaxy will know. Soon everyone will see what they did to us." To you, he touched the hologram gently. His fingers passed through light and memory. "Wait for me a little longer. I will see you soon." Commander Haihung found him there an hour later. She said nothing. She simply stood beside him in the darkness, sharing his grief. The silence flew on through the void. 4 rotations remained until they reached their destination. For days until the truth was set free. And in the halls of power, an empire that had never known fear began to learn what it felt like to be hunted by something they could not see. 4 rotations remained. For days until the unknown ship reached the capital world, the hegemony's fear had grown into something close to madness. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at empty space. Somewhere out there, something was coming. He could see nothing. His sensors showed nothing. But gravity itself told him the truth. He had commanded fleets for 3 centuries. He had never felt so helpless. Korath made a decision born of desperation. If he could not target the enemy, he would simply destroy everything in its path. He ordered 700 warships to form a line across the approaching object's calculated trajectory. They would fire everything they had at empty space and hope to hit something. The barrage lasted 3 hours. Enough firepower to crack a planet poured into the void. Energy beams, missiles, plasma cannons. The darkness lit up like a second sun. When the firing stopped, Korath waited for the gravitational readings. The object was still coming. It had moved. Just slightly. Just enough to avoid the bombardment. Then it resumed its original course, as if nothing had happened. Korath felt ice in his blood. Whoever was piloting that ship had seen the attack coming, without sensors, without any detectable means of observation. They had simply known. What kind of beings were these humans? On the capital world, the civilian population was starting to notice that something was wrong. Military ships filled the sky. Soldiers patrolled the streets. The government said nothing, but silence bred fear. Rumors spread through the population like fire. Some said it was a military exercise. Others whispered about an invasion. A few brave souls wondered if the hegemony's many crimes were finally coming back to haunt them. Intelligence. Director Silex presented a new theory to the council. The approaching object was not a ship at all. It was a weapon. The humans had developed some kind of planet killer that operated on unknown principles. They were coming to destroy the capital world. In revenge for 40 years of oppression, Chancellor Morthix considered this carefully. The hegemony had destroyed many species over the millennia. They had erased civilizations that posed even the smallest threat. Perhaps they had finally pushed someone too far. He made a decision that would echo through history. Morthix authorized protocol. Omega. This was the complete destruction of Earth and all human. Colonies throughout the galaxy. Every human would be killed. Every trace of their civilization would be erased. If humanity wanted war, they would receive extinction instead. Guards brought Ambassador Sunwu for the council to hear this sentence. The old man listened calmly as Morthix described the fate of his species. When the Chancellor finished, he expected begging. He expected tears. He expected the human to crawl and plead for mercy. Instead, Sunwu laughed. It was a quiet laugh, tired and sad, but genuine. You still do not understand us, Sunwu said. You have watched humanity for 40 years and learned nothing. What is there to understand? Morthix demanded. Your species is primitive, weak. You are insects compared to the hegemony. Sunwu shook his head slowly. Humans do not send planet killers, Chancellor. We do not believe in making martyrs of our enemies. That is your way, not ours. Then what is approaching our world? The old ambassador smiled. The truth. And you cannot kill truth. Not with 1,000 fleets. Not with 1,000,000 soldiers. Truth spreads. Truth survives. Truth remembers. He was taken back to his cell. The council debated for hours. Some wanted to launch the attack on Earth immediately. Others argued they should wait until they understood the approaching threat. While they argued, the silence flew on. Aboard the ship, Lieutenant Og Yan led an informal gathering in the mess hall. The crew needed comfort. They needed to remember why they were here. Jian was the ship's cultural specialist. She had spent years collecting stories from integration survivors. She knew more about humanity's suffering than anyone aboard. She told them about her grandmother. The old woman had survived the Busan integration, one of the bloodiest events in human history. The hegemony had killed 2 million people in 3 days. Gin's grandmother had hidden in a basement with 30 other survivors for 2 weeks before rescue came. She spent her remaining years documenting what happened, Gin said. Every name, every story, every crime. She always told me the same thing. The crew listened in silence. She said, They fear us because they do not understand us. They do not understand that humans would rather die standing than live kneeling. Captain Doyen entered the mess hall. The conversation stopped. Every eye turned to him. He looked around at his crew. Scientists and soldiers, engineers and doctors, poets and pilots, ordinary people who had volunteered for a mission they knew would kill them. I have news, he said. The hegemony has mobilized their entire defense fleet. We have detected gravitational signatures of approximately 12,000 warships between us and the capital. They have also authorized Protocol Omega, the complete destruction of Earth. Nobody spoke. The weight of those words hung in the air like a physical thing. We knew this was possible, Doyen continued. We planned for it. Earth has prepared shelters. The colonies have evacuation procedures. Our people will survive even if our planet does not. He paused, gathering his thoughts. In 60 hours, the galaxy will know the truth about our oppressors. Whatever happens after that, to us, to Earth, the truth will remain. That is what we are dying for. Not revenge. Not conquest. Not glory. Truth. He looked at each face in the room. I am proud to serve with every one of you. Now get some rest. We have a galaxy to wake up. The crew dispersed slowly. Some went to their quarters. Others stayed in the mess hall, talking quietly about home, about family, about the world they would never see again. 60 hours remained. The silence continued. Its journey into the heart of darkness. 2 rotations remained. Silence approached the final defense perimeter. Admiral Korath had reorganized his fleet into a massive sphere around the capital world. He could not target the enemy, so he would fill space with weapons fire. Nothing could pass through his wall of ships without being hit, or so he believed. The capital world itself had activated its planetary shields. These barriers were the strongest in the galaxy. They could withstand the explosion of a star. The population was told to remain calm. They were told they were safe. Chancellor Morthix appeared on screens across the galaxy, spoke of an unknown threat approaching. He promised that the hegemony's military would protect everyone. He spoke with confidence and authority. He did not mention humans. He did not mention the decades of atrocities. He did not mention that his empire was built on lies and blood, but cracks were appearing in the hegemony's perfect control. On the colony world of Veth Prime, a young journalist named Kithric received a strange message. It got arrived through channels that should have been impossible. It contained fragments of information about something called Project Silence. It referenced a truth broadcast that would soon reach every world. Kithric began investigating. He did not know that similar messages had been sent to journalists across the galaxy. He did not know that humanity had been planting seeds for years, preparing the ground for what was to come. When the truth arrived, people would be ready to listen. Aboard the Silence, Commander Yoon Hai-hoon worked with Navigation Officer Choi Yoonji on the final approach plan. They needed to reach within 50,000 kilometers of the capital world. At that range, the Whisper device would achieve full coverage. Every world would receive the message, but 12,000 warships stood between them and their target. Can we get through? Hai-hoon asked. Woonji studied her calculations. Her fingers moved across holographic displays. Numbers and trajectories danced in the air. Maybe, she said finally. Their formation has gaps. They cannot cover everything without sensors to guide them. If we are careful and lucky, we might slip through. But if even one shot hits us, we could be disabled. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-won had prepared for this moment. He had spent years designing the ship's last defense. The Silence carried 12 small drones, each capable of creating false gravitational signatures. The drones would not fool the hegemony for long, but they might create enough confusion to give the Silence time to slip through the defensive line. Captain Doyen approved the plan. At 16 hours from target, the drones would launch. Would scatter in 12 different directions, each one pretending to be a ship as massive as the Silence itself. The hegemony would have to respond to all of them. And while they chased ghosts, the real ghost would slip through their fingers. In his quarters, Doyen sat at his small desk and wrote a letter. It was an old habit, one his father had taught him. Even though the Silence carried no communication equipment, even though the letter could never be sent, he wrote anyway. The act of writing made his thoughts real. It gave his feelings shape and weight. Dear Giwoo, he wrote, if you are reading this, then somehow I survived. Or perhaps someone found this letter among the wreckage of our ship and thought it deserved to reach you. He paused, thinking of his daughter's face. She had her mother's eyes. It's those warm, dark eyes that could see through any lie, any pretense. I want you to know that I did not choose this mission to leave you. I chose it so that you might live in a galaxy where leaving is not the only choice, where humans are not integrated, where truth is not a crime. He wrote about her mother, about how Mireille had always believed that truth was worth any price. It's about how she had died because she spoke when others stayed silent. I love you, Jiwoo. Whatever happens, remember that your father died trying to give the galaxy something it desperately needed. Hope. He signed the letter APA and folded it carefully. He placed it in a small container designed to survive the destruction of the ship. It was a foolish hope, but hope was all he had left. The hours passed slowly. The crew prepared for the final run. Dr. Hans Soman checked her medical supplies. She knew there would be wounded. She knew she could not save everyone, but she would try. She would fight for every life until her last breath. Lieutenant O'Gillen gathered the crew's personal messages. Nearly everyone had written something: letters to family, apologies to old friends, declarations of love that had never been spoken aloud. She stored them all in the same survival container as the captain's letter. If the ship was destroyed, perhaps these words would survive. Perhaps they would float through space until someone found them. Perhaps the galaxy would know who these people were and what they had sacrificed. At 18 hours from target, silence entered the outer edge of the hegemony defensive sphere. The ship went completely dark. Every non-essential system shut down. The crew breathed recycled air and moved by touch in the darkness. They were ghosts now, shadows moving through the void. At 16 hours, the drones launched. 12 small craft scattered like seeds from a dying flower. Each one began broadcasting false gravitational signatures. Each one pretended to be the silence. Aboard the hegemony flagship, chaos erupted. Suddenly, there were 13 massive objects where there had been one. Korath's careful formation dissolved. As thousands of ships broke ranks to chase the new contacts, the silence slipped through the gap. Like a blade between ribs. 8 hours remained, then 4, then 2. The final barrier lay ahead. The heart of the Empire waited, and humanity came for them in silence. The final hours had come. The silence moved through the heart of the hegemony fleet like a shadow passing through light. All around them, warships chased the decoy drones. Confusion reigned. Orders were shouted and countermanded. The perfect military machine had become chaos. Captain Doyen stood on the bridge watching the darkness outside his ship. He could not see the enemy vessels. His ship had no active sensors. He could only trust his navigation officer and hope. At 8 hours from target, the silence passed the innermost defense line. They were now closer to the capital world than any enemy had ever come. Chancellor Morthix watched the chaos from his palace and felt something he had not experienced in 5 centuries. Fear, not fear of death. The planetary shields would protect him from any weapon. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what humans had become during those quiet decades of apparent submission. Fear of what he did not understand. At 4 hours from target, the hegemony finally got lucky. A patrol ship, hunting one of the decoys, detected a faint gravitational disturbance. It was not a clear signal. It was barely a whisper in the fabric of space. But it was enough. The patrol ship broadcast an alert. Within minutes, 17 warships converged on the silence's position. They could not see the human vessel. They could not lock their weapons. But they knew where it was. They fired everything. The silence shuddered as the first impacts hit. Energy beams tore through the hull. Explosions ripped open decks, 7 through 12. In a single moment, 43 crew members died. But the ship kept moving. Chief Engineer Kim Taiwan raced through burning corridors, rerouting power from destroyed systems. His hands were burned. His lungs filled with smoke. He did not stop. Navigation Officer Choi Yoonji stayed at her station, manually adjusting their course as debris blocked automatic systems. A support beam had fallen across her legs. She ignored the pain and kept working. Captain Doyen ordered all hands to emergency stations. His voice was calm. His heart was breaking. At 2 hours from target, another barrage hit the silence. More sections of the ship were destroyed. More lives were lost. Dr. Han Salman worked frantically in the medical bay, trying to save the wounded while the deck shook beneath her. She lost 3 patients in 10 minutes. She saved 7. She kept working at 1 hour from target. The silence entered broadcast range of the capital world. Lieutenant Ogion activated the whisper device. The technology was beyond anything the hegemony had ever imagined. quantum entangled particles, prepared over decades on Earth, began transmitting simultaneously to receivers. Hidden on 10,000 worlds, the message could not be blocked. The message could not be jammed. The message could not be stopped. Every screen in the galaxy flickered, and the truth began to pour forth. Images of integration camps, audio recordings of hegemony officials discussing population management, video evidence of entire species being sterilized, documents proving the suppression of technology across the galaxy, testimonies from survivors, names of the dead, faces of the lost, 40 years of carefully gathered evidence, broadcast to every corner of the galaxy in an instant. On the capital world, citizens stopped in the streets and stared at their screens. They saw things they had never imagined. They heard confessions from their own leaders. They watched recordings of genocide that had been hidden for centuries. On Veth Prime, the journalist Kithrock finally understood what his anonymous source had been trying to tell him. The truth had arrived. Now it was his job to make sure people listened. On 100,000 worlds, beings who had believed in the hegemony's kindness saw the real face of their rulers. Shock turned to horror. Horror turned to anger. Chancellor Morthic screamed orders at his technicians. Stop the broadcast. Block the signal. Do something they could do nothing. The transmission operated on principles they did not understand. It was beyond their control. He ordered the silence destroyed. Every weapon in range opened fire. Aboard the dying ship, Captain Park Do-yeon watched the message counter climb. 60% transmitted. 70%. 80%. Commander Yoon Ha-young died at her station. Still working until her last breath, Navigation Officer Choi Yoon-ji died when the bridge finally collapsed. Her hands still on the controls. Chief Engineer Kim Taiwan held the whisper device together with his burned hands as fire consumed the engine room. He refused to let go. 90%. Do-yeon thought of his daughter Jiwoo. He thought of his wife Mireille. He thought of Earth, the small blue world he would never see again. 95%. The final barrage hit. The silence began to break apart. Metal screamed. Air rushed into the void. Lights flickered and died. 100%. Transmission complete, Captain. Park Do-yeon smiled as the darkness took him. The silence was destroyed. 847 humans died in an instant. Their ship became a cloud of debris drifting through space. But the message survived. Within hours, protests erupted on 1,000 worlds. Beings who had never questioned the hegemony took to the streets, demanding answers. Within days, 3 species formally withdrew from the Empire. Within weeks, a coalition formed. Dozens of civilizations united not by military power, but by a shared sense of justice. Earth was not destroyed. The fleet sent to annihilate humanity was recalled to deal with the growing unrest. Protocol Omega was quietly abandoned. The hegemony had bigger problems now. Ambassador Bae Soon-woo was released from his cell. He returned to Earth as a hero, though he refused all praise. "I just talked," he said. The crew of the Silence did the real work. A memorial was built on Earth. 847 names were carved into black granite. At the center stood a statue of a ship emerging from darkness, reaching toward the stars. At the dedication ceremony, a young woman named Park Jo-woo stood before the crowd. She held a letter that had been found floating in space. Sealed in a survival container, her father's last words. She read them aloud, her voice carrying across the silent gathering. "Some things are worth more than survival," she read. "That is what my father believed. That is what the crew of the Silence believed. They were not soldiers seeking glory. They were ordinary people who saw injustice and refused to look away." She folded the letter and looked up at the stars. "The hegemony called us primitive. They said we were too weak to matter. But they forgot something important about humans." She smiled through her tears. "We do not need to be the strongest. We just need to be the ones willing to speak the truth, no matter the cost." Above, Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the debris of the silence drifted among the stars. A ghost ship that had become a legend. A crew that had become immortal, and a galaxy that, for the first time in 12,000 years, began to wake up. The truth had been spoken, and the universe would never be the same.